Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I'm going to be discussing a question that has to do with future Trunks. More specifically, something that I've heard speculated on a number of times over the course of my time in the Dragon Ball fandom. That would have to be in relation to Trunks' first departure, but certainly not the last, from the main timeline. And that would be the question of, where did future Trunks go, and what was he doing during the 3-year time skip after he gave Goku the heart virus medication and disappeared in his time machine? Well, in this video, I'm going to be going in depth into that, bringing up the manga, and also discussing some fan theories I've heard along the way, including one that would drastically change the story if it actually is true. Is it? Well, I guess you'll have to wait and see. That's kind of the whole point of the video, right? And so, before I get into that, if you like this content, subscribe, enable notifications. That way you'll see my videos all year round in your sub feed. And you can also check out my channel if for whatever reason that fails you. With that being said, let's pop open the Dragon Ball manga and take a look into this subject. I think when I started my channel, I used to say, well, let's take a closer look at this and find out. Maybe I should bring that back. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you like that. Give me your own thoughts throughout the course of the video too. Also, am I sharing my cool banner? Yes, I am. All right, so let's get into that example first. Of course, Trunks, like I said before, he killed Frieza and King Cold, and then he proceeded to give Goku the virus medication. That would in turn make it to where he would, the second symptoms appeared, not die the way that he did in the main timeline, in the original timeline, in Trunks' timeline that he came from. Two separate timelines, of course. And so, when that happened, what did Trunks go on to say before he disappeared? Now, Trunks says to Goku something interesting, which is that he now has hope because he saw Goku's strength firsthand. Of course, Trunks represents hope in the story. After all, he painted on his time machine, or at least his mother Bulma did. I'll get into that time machine, some other things momentarily. But Goku then asks him when he's about to leave, will I ever see you again? Trunks goes on to say, I'm not sure. It takes a long time to store up the energy required for a round trip in the time machine. If I'm still alive after that, I'll definitely come to help you out in 3 years' time. 3 years' time is an interesting figure here. After all, 3 years would pass for people in the main timeline, but how long really passes for Trunks when he leaves? That's a whole question. In Dragon Ball Super, they say that time passes 1-to-1. Essentially that when a day is passing in our timeline, for example, a day is passing in Trunks's, even though Trunks is in the future. It's that the time is essentially playing out exactly the same. However, in Dragon Ball Z, in the Dragon Ball manga, that's never stated. Rather, it's just that Trunks is saying that it takes a long time for the energy to be built up for a round trip. So, for a very long time, when I initially saw this, I had always thought that Trunks actually went forward 3 years with his second trip, that maybe it took a lot less energy, and thus as a result, he decided to jump forward 3 years in time to immediately check on everything, and basically was the exact same Trunks with the same power level and everything at the time. Now, in this case, of course, Goku says that Trunks is going to have something to work toward in the meantime, that Goku will be training. And by the time that Trunks inevitably shows back up in the story, it does seem like his power hasn't really changed, and that he probably would be relatively the same level of strength. 3 years later, he appears right in front of the town on the island that was attacked by the androids. The Jinzo Ningen, androids 19 and 20. Dr. Gero himself, a combination of Gero and Gero, just to appease or maybe make angry the English dub fans and the Japanese fans. So at this point, we see Trunks is floating. You know, Trunks loves to enter the screen by just having his feet show up because Toriyama gave the direction duties to Quentin Tarantino in all the Trunks shots. And basically, we see that he's mentioning how he doesn't see everything. And not just that, but also at that point he mentions, I'd like to go back further in the time machine, but I barely have enough fuel to get myself back home. Now, like I just said before, Trunks specifically mentioned it takes a while for him to store up the energy required for a round trip in the time machine. Trunks specifically makes sure to say this, and Toriyama wrote him to say this because it's stated and implied that he went back to his future. After all, right before he left, he actually does explain a little bit about this, where he says to Goku that he was going to go back in time, forward in time, to a different universe, basically, so that he'd be able to tell his mother that things, had worked out, that he was still alive, that he was going to essentially reassure her that everything went to plan. After all, this was kind of her plan in the first place, either save Goku and thus find a means of defeating them in the past, the androids 17 and 18, or rather to at least figure out some way to bring Goku to the future and then kill them there. So that's what he says right here. He's going back to reassure his mom, which means that he was there for 3 years. However, like I said before, there's no indication that Trunks was training during that time, that he got any stronger. He just shows up basically, seemingly the same amount of power he was before, and then in turn mentions that he wanted to go back a little bit. However, the thing is that his time machine isn't perfect, and he might still be off by a little bit. That's probably why he showed up at the time that he does here, after everything already started. He most likely wanted to show up right before this happened, alongside the other Z fighters, where they began to attack the city, wiping everyone out. You see the damage and the wreckage that Trunks is looking on right here as well. And so he goes and figures out things that are happening, sensing the key. And of course, this is when he finds the head of 19, which, looks like drool or something coming out. You kind of have to wonder why a robot would need drool. But this is when, everything starts to go into motion, where he says everything about how the androids are different from the ones in his time. He begins to explain everything to the Z fighters. And we don't really get much explained after this point for a little bit as to what Trunks might have been doing during this time. I like to say time, as you guys can tell. This is going to lead into this part right here, where Trunks is on the plane, the transport, going and carrying Goku to Master Roshi's house, during which everyone's explaining what should happen, because things are kind of getting out of control. Trunks at this point mentions something, which is that he thought maybe it would be a good idea for him to go back even further in time and go to Dr. Gero's laboratory and destroy all the artificial humans, the androids, before they are even awoken. This is the point where Krillin points out to Trunks, because for some reason it seems like Trunks doesn't truly understand how time travel works, which I'm going to do a whole video on in the future, analyzing this even further. And mentions him, you said your time machine wasn't perfect, and it also takes a lot of time and energy for a round trip to happen. He also says, if you go further back, will you even be able to get back to your own time? Trunks says, I'm not sure. This is when he realizes, oh wait, this stuff wouldn't even happen anyway, because Gohan points this out. What would happen to the androids in our time? That's right, I had completely forgotten. How? Sure, if I were to go back to the past and destroy the artificial humans, the future of that timeline would be spared, but in this timeline, where the artificial humans have already been activated, nothing would change. And thus, there's a Goku that's alive in the future, or that's dead in the future, but in this one, he's alive. And in other words, basically what I just said. And they ask, why did you even come back and do that? And it was kind of his mom's idea, Bulma, where she wanted there to be a timeline where the androids didn't ravage everything, where Goku is still alive, and basically, come up with the overall plan. So I think this is a big reason actually as to why Trunks went back in the first place, because after all, Trunks says right here that he wanted to reassure his mother that everything went fine. So I think part of that is also that they wanted to find out how time travel truly worked. Because let's think about it like this. All they had until Trunks actually went back in time was, well, theory. It makes sense why Trunks was a little confused about how time travel might actually work. Nobody had ever done it before him until Dragon Ball Super, where they reveal somebody might have done that before. But either way, nobody had ever really done it in this universe to our knowledge until this point. And thus, as a result, it means that everything they had was theoretical. So when you have this scene right here, for instance, where Trunks is telling Goku, please keep that part especially secret with regard to Bulma and Vegeta being his parents, he says that his entire existence could be wiped out. Again, Trunks doesn't know for a fact that making alterations in the past won't alter his future until he goes forward and talks to his mom and sees that everything is in fact the case, which he's referencing here. So I think that's a big reason why he decided to go back to the future, and also very possibly because of the fact that it would take a long time to regenerate the energy in his time machine, and thus as a result of that. Now, that leaves open the question of what was Trunks actually doing there during that time, and how long did it take for this quote-unquote long time to pass? Well, we get some indicators here. Like, for example, in the final chapter that Trunks is in the original manga, the chapter 319, One More Conclusion, we see that when Trunks returns to the future, he does, in turn, wipe out the androids with his newfound power, and not just that, but also we skip forward to when Cell arrives. Now, when does this happen? 3 years later. Enough energy has now been gathered for Trunks to go back to the past once again to tell the androids that he killed or to tell the Z fighters that he killed the androids. If he tells the androids there, hey, by the way, I just murdered you in the future, you better watch yourself, that would have been a much different way for the story to conclude. But in this case, it took 3 years. However, the thing is, did that actually happen the exact same amount of time, for instance? Or was it a shorter amount? Did Trunks show up at 13 or at 17 when he initially killed King Cold and Frieza, and then he was 20 when he came back? He doesn't really look any different compared to, well, 3 years later during this time skip, or also when he goes back to the future when he is 2 years older. That's kind of left up in the air and a little ambiguous as to exactly how much time necessarily passed. However, as he says, it does take a long time. So if we do think that perhaps 3 years passed, this means that Trunks was in the future for 3 years, and well, it didn't seem like he was training during that time to our knowledge, because it's never really implied he's much stronger. Both Goku and Vegeta are stronger than he is by the time he goes to the main timeline again and is witnessing the fight between Vegeta, Trunks, or, Vegeta 18 and 19, or geez, Mike, get all your numbers correct. It's not like you're doing a complicated time travel video after all. But no, by the time, he went back, it seemed like he was the weakest of the Super Saiyans. And also, with that being said, another thing is too, it's never really implied that Trunks fought the androids again during this time. Some people might speculate he did, he continued to, but it's never really said that that's the case. The only time we know for a fact in the manga Trunks fought them was after this point here, where he raced off to face them and then woke up in the hospital and was, well, wrecked. In the future, or when he goes back again, around the time that we start to find out more and more of everything happening in the main story, the thing is that he never really brings up that he had fought them one more time, or a number of times. There is only one little reference that maybe something had happened between the androids and Trunks, which is again right when he goes to kill them, which is when he shows up to fight against them, and 17 says, what, you're still alive? Don't you know putting all this effort into something this futile makes you an idiot? So there is an argument that because 17, as I pointed out in the past, does want to keep Trunks alive as their favorite punching bag because he wants to enjoy fighting the only super-powered individual on the planet who would actually give them a challenge, this is something that might indicate that maybe There were some battles in between, but again, as I mentioned in the video, you guys can see in the top right corner, it doesn't seem like the Saiyans ever get any Zenkai boost from the androids, perhaps because their bodies can't truly sense them and they're always holding back to a significant degree to, well, have fun with them. And thus, as a result, Trunks doesn't seem to improve. Thus, I think it's likely that during this point in time, as he's pointing out with regard to what's going on in the future and how terrible it is, he was probably just living in one of these underground bunkers, these bases that they have, and just trying his best to survive. Even Goku says right here, when Trunks is about to leave, for him to, well, do his best to stay alive. And so that's what I think Trunks was doing. He's probably doing his best to protect his mom, to make sure that if the android showed up, he would be able to help out, and just waiting for the time machine to regain its energy. However, there is another theory that I hinted at before that throws a lot of this out of whack, which is the idea that the Trunks that we see here, the Trunks that Goku is talking to right here, is actually not the same Trunks who shows up in the main timeline 3 years later when the androids are attacking, but rather a different Trunks entirely. This is something that people have often speculated about in the story. What if the Trunks that showed back up actually wasn't the same? And that ties into Cell, specifically everything with regard to this other time machine. So let's do a little bit further context here before I get into the time machine itself. There's something that Trunks says that also might lend slight credibility to this theory. When Trunks shows up, not only are things different in this timeline with the androids, as we could see here, and the fact that he specifically points out that the time machine is not perfect, but also the fact is that, well, when everyone is on board the ship right here, Trunks says something quite interesting. He says that, but now it seems as if I've come into a past slightly different than the past that I'm familiar with. The timing of when Goku was supposed to come down with the heart virus has changed. Additionally, there are now 3 artificial humans, and they're even stronger than the ones I fought. Now, this could be interpreted, and very likely is what Toriyama's going for, that he's just saying that the past is different from the one that Bulma told him about. Different from, you know, what was normally going to happen because the butterfly effect and other changes. However, many people have often wondered, well, maybe the original Trunks went to the future and then either never came back for whatever reason, or that he went to a different timeline entirely, and that this Trunks is actually a different Trunks from another timeline en route that ended up, well, appearing here because of the influence of the one who changed everything even more than Trunks did in the first place. And that would be the person who took this time machine, if you even want to call him a person, that Trunks goes on to find, where we start to see more and more differences are happening, where Trunks, Gohan, and Bulma go to investigate. They find the original time machine from Cell's timeline as well as his egg, and even finding out that he came from 3 years after Trunks had arrived. Of course, the exact same time that this I just showed you before was happening. 3 years after Trunks, the original one, killed the androids, we see Cell arrives. However, in this version of the story, in the main timeline, this Trunks finds out that that Cell did everything, that he was the one who went back in time, used his time machine, and he was made aware of the whole situation, which allowed him to be able to not be caught off guard by Cell, to kill him, and prevent that from happening again. So many have speculated that perhaps the original Trunks that actually left the timeline because of how time travel may theoretically work actually was killed by Cell after he left, And then Cell went back in time and changed everything and altered everything. And as a result, the Trunks that shows up already was a Trunks that would have returned after the 3 years later. And this is actually a different alternate version of future Trunks, and the original one never came back. This is somebody who doesn't even realize that he isn't the same Trunks as before, that he was just created as a timeline duplicate by this Cell after he killed Trunks, and in turn, making everything kind of go massively out of whack in the main timeline. And, even Cell confirms that he killed Trunks in the future initially and stole his time machine so that he'd be able to go back and take Jiro's machines for himself, 17 and 18. However, interestingly, Piccolo asks the question of why Cell came back to this time, and he says Trunks' machine had already been preset to arrive in this era. All he had to do was push a button. Now, you can argue maybe this is a plot hole. I've discussed that in a past video about the biggest plot holes in the Cell saga, but perhaps it isn't. Maybe because of what Trunks says right here. The time machine isn't perfect. Additionally, when Trunks is on route to help Goku and everything, he again mentions the concept of him going back in time even further and destroying the androids before they could be activated. Maybe that was what Trunks was going to initially do, and Cell killed him before he could do that. And thus, as a result, because of this is what created this timeline, and Trunks actually would have created this timeline all along because of the fact that he didn't understand time travel to begin with. It's a massive mind F, let's say, and resurrection F, and as a result, caused everything to massively spin out of proportions and lead to the Cell saga and basically everything there. So as a result, I don't think that Trunks really was fighting against the androids or training for 3 years. I don't think he just went forward 3 years. Rather, he went to the future and then spent whatever amount of time he was there in order to gather the necessary information or the necessary energy and tell Bulma what had happened, confirm that time travel worked the way that, they thought, where they would create a different timeline, making it now practical rather than theoretical, and thus in turn, making it to where everything unfolded the way it did, and eventually Trunks could go back to the future, not Marty McFly's or Biff's, but rather his own, and kill Cell, stopping the infinite loop of creating new timelines, and thus in turn, bringing peace to his time until Goku Black. And that's why I think that's what happened during the time skip with Trunks. Let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. Do you think that this is what happened? Do you think that perhaps Trunks actually is an alternate duplicate like many fans have speculated over the years? Or perhaps instead, is it something else entirely? I would love to hear you guys discuss. I know this is a very convoluted and complex story after all. Also, additionally, make sure to like, subscribe, share this video out, and stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.